Deep inside Japan's most fortified prison, there was one inmate every guard feared and every warden dreaded, a man named Suzuki. No matter how tight the security, no matter how many locks stood between him and freedom, he always found a way out. This is his story. One evening, after the guard on duty finished his routine check and walked away, Suzuki suddenly smiled to himself and pulled one of his own teeth out. Minutes later, when the guards returned to check on him again, his cell was empty. Something felt wrong, but Suzuki was no ordinary prisoner. He moved without a sound, slipping through shadows and avoiding every beam of light. By the time the guards searched the isolation cell a second time, the truth had sunk and Suzuki was gone. Alarms blared through the compound as guards scrambled together. As he made his way across the rooftop, sirens screamed into the night and a sudden storm broke overhead. And that's when the story rewinds 12 years into the past to explain exactly how it all began. 12 years earlier, a group of new prisoners was brought into a facility, and Suzuki was among them, sentenced to 10 years behind bars. He never spoke a single word, so everyone simply assumed he was mute. Across his chest was a strange tattoo, an upside-down image of Mount Fuji. Even back then, Suzuki already had a reputation. He had escaped from prison 3 times before. This time, he was placed in a small, bare cell with nothing but a single skylight above him. He stared up at it for a long while, clearly turning something over in his mind. Outside, a guard assured the prison's warden, a man named Murasaki, that there was no chance Suzuki would escape this time. But the moment Murasaki looked through the cell window, Suzuki had already vanished. Furious, the warden ordered the entire town locked down to make sure Suzuki couldn't slip away. It didn't take long. Guards found him within 20 minutes, running straight down a set of railway tracks. For reasons nobody understood, he was dragged back to the same cell, this time in handcuffs. The next time a guard peeked inside, Suzuki appeared to be asleep with a sheet pulled over his face. Annoyed, the guard ordered him to remove it, unwilling to take any chances. When Suzuki ignored the order, the guards stormed in and beat him badly. The following morning, Warden Murasaki pulled every one of Suzuki's old case files and studied them closely. A pattern jumped out immediately every single time Suzuki escaped. He was eventually caught on train tracks. That night, Murasaki and a guard went to check on him again and found something alarming. Suzuki's handcuffs had somehow come undone. Enraged, they beat him once more, demanding to know how he kept freeing himself. As always, Suzuki said nothing and took another beating in silence. Around this time, he was caught quietly playing with a thin piece of wire he had smuggled inside, hidden in his mouth. That wire was his key, literally. He had been using it all along to pick the lock on his own handcuffs. Not long after, Warden Murasaki left for a week-long vacation, leaving Suzuki what looked like the perfect opportunity. He worked at the lock with everything he had. During a routine check, a guard glanced in and saw what appeared to be Suzuki sleeping under his blanket, and walked away without another word. But that figure under the blanket wasn't Suzuki at all. He had already climbed up and pressed himself flat against the ceiling like a lizard, waiting patiently for the right moment. Once the guard left, he made his move, climbing higher until he reached the last stretch of the roof. One solid punch through the weak point, and he broke free. The moment the guards realized what had happened, sirens went off, and word was rushed to Murasaki, who cut his vacation short and raced back. The next morning, the police were mapping out a plan to recapture him when Murasaki arrived. He told them to forget searching everywhere else and send a single team straight to the nearest railway tracks. The officers scoffed, muttering that the old warden had clearly lost his mind. Why would Suzuki go to the same spot every single time? But Murasaki insisted he was certain, and reluctantly, they sent the team anyway. He was right. Suzuki was caught on the tracks once again. Because his instincts had proven so sharp, Murasaki was promoted. He became a senior official responsible for inspecting prisoner conditions across the entire country. Meanwhile, Suzuki kept doing what he did best, escaping again and again, only to be caught on train tracks every single time. Each year he was transferred to a new facility with tighter security than the last, yet he always slipped through. The media latched onto his story, crowning him the nation's star escapee. and his name became famous across the country. 12 years passed, and Suzuki was finally transferred to the central prison, the very high security facility where our story began. 10 guards were assigned to watch him and him alone. His cell was built entirely of solid concrete, sealed behind a door with multiple locks, the same isolation cell we saw right at the start. The moment he was placed inside, Suzuki began scanning every corner of the room, already plotting his next move. When a guard came to drop off his food, Suzuki grabbed him and clamped a pair of handcuffs onto him before he could react. The guard blew his whistle immediately, and several others rushed in, beating Suzuki savagely for it. When he came to, he watched through blurry, blood-streaked eyes as the guards walked away, drops of blood from his face falling onto the iron bars of his cell. The next morning, guards reinforced his handcuffs with extra screws, so there was no way he could pick them open again, but not before giving him another round of what they cynically called maintenance. This became Suzuki's routine. He would deliberately provoke the guards, take a beating, and let his blood drip onto the iron bars each time. One day, a guard struck him so hard that one of his teeth was knocked loose. Suzuki simply picked it up off the floor and stared at it with an unsettling smile, as if this, too, was part of some larger plan. From then on, he began quietly scraping something into the wall with that same tooth. A few weeks later, Suzuki attacked another guard, and this time the punishment was severe. He was bound in heavy chains and left hanging for an entire year. His body deteriorated badly, wounds festered, and infections set in. Finally, one stormy evening, the guards released him from the chains, giving him his first real breath of relief in 12 long months. Around that same time, Murasaki, now a senior inspector, arrived to check on the facility. He saw firsthand just how badly Suzuki's condition had become, but chose to look away and left without a word. That brings us back to the stormy night where this story began. As lightning cracked across the sky, Suzuki finally put his plan into motion. He pulled out the sharpened tooth and began working at the screws holding his handcuffs together. As it turned out, he hadn't been carving random marks into the wall all those weeks. He had been sharpening that tooth into a tool precise enough to unscrew metal fittings. Once free of his restraints, he moved to the cell door and began pushing against the iron bars again and again. Months of blood dripping onto that same spot had quietly rusted the metal through. Within moments, the bars snapped, and Suzuki was free of the prison at last. Only then does the story reveal where all of this obsession with escaping truly came from. Suzuki's mother had died the moment he was born, and his father had been rotting away in prison for years. Left with no one, he grew up in a relative's home. One day, while he was out training alone in the forest, he noticed a man approaching from a distance. It was his father. They spoke for a short while, and during that conversation, Suzuki noticed something. His father bore the exact same tattoo across his chest, that upside-down image of Mount Fuji. But their reunion was cut short. Police officers appeared almost immediately, there to arrest his father, who bolted and ran straight down a set of railway tracks trying to escape. In that moment, young Suzuki made himself a promise. No matter how long it took, he would find his father again one day. Back in the present, Suzuki was on the run once more, sprinting down familiar train tracks. From behind him, Murasaki called out for him to stop, and to everyone's shock, Suzuki actually did. Within moments, a team of guards arrived and took him into custody. Since even the country's most secure prison couldn't hold him, Murasaki gave the order to transfer Suzuki to the most dangerous prison facility on Earth, President Isle. This was nothing like an ordinary jail. It sat in the middle of the open ocean, surrounded by violent currents strong enough to sweep anyone away. There were no railway tracks anywhere near it, and the surrounding waters were infested with sharks. Escaping from President Isle wasn't just difficult, it was considered flatly impossible. Inside, conditions were just as brutal. Thousands of armed guards patrolled the grounds at all times, and any prisoner caught attempting to flee was to be shot on sight. The moment Suzuki arrived, he was locked away, not in a normal cell, but bound tightly by ropes wrapped around his entire body, so that even the smallest movement was impossible. Meanwhile, Murasaki made his way to the prison's records library, digging through old files to learn everything he could about Suzuki's past. As he read, deep inside his restraints, Suzuki stood completely still seemingly deep in focus. While escape seemed unthinkable for anyone else confined the way he was, something was already brewing in his mind. Without warning, he dislocated both of his shoulders and began contorting his body, slowly shrinking himself down enough to slip free of the ropes. Another prisoner nearby actually witnessed it happening, but he was too dazed and disoriented to say anything to anyone. Murasaki was still buried in his research when the prison siren suddenly began to wail. Strangely, instead of panicking, the current warden of President Isle seemed almost pleased after all. There was nowhere for anyone to actually escape to, and now his guards finally had the chance to shoot an escaping prisoner. Murasaki tried desperately to warn him that Suzuki was unlike any inmate they dealt with before, but the warden brushed him off entirely. By the next morning, armed guards had spread out across every corner of the island. As the warden briefed his men, Murasaki arrived and dropped the truth on all of them at once. Suzuki hadn't been sent here by circumstance. He had orchestrated his own path to this exact island because his father was imprisoned here, and Suzuki had been searching for him all along. Everyone standing there was stunned into silence. That revelation reframed everything that had happened up to that point. Every escape, every recapture, every single time Suzuki had been caught deliberately near a set of train tracks, none of it had been failure. It had all been calculated, a years-long plan designed to eventually land him in the one prison holding his father captive. His true goal had never been freedom for its own sake. It had always been about finding his father, and in the end, he did. Father and son stood face to face after all those years apart, and both of them broke down in tears. But their reunion was fragile. Murasaki, the warden, and the rest of the guards were closing in, and just before they could reach the two men, Suzuki vanished into the island with the old man beside him. He led his father all the way to the edge of the island, to a hidden paraglider he had secretly prepared in advance. Together, they climbed aboard and flew off into the distance, disappearing from sight. Back on the ground, Murasaki approached another elderly prisoner who had been held alongside Suzuki's father, and froze. There, across the old man's chest, was the very same upside-down Mount Fuji tattoo. After everything Suzuki had endured, after 12 years of pain, beatings, and relentless planning, he had escaped the world's most dangerous prison with the wrong man entirely. Could there be a worse twist of fate than that? And how far would you go for your own father? Let us know what you think in the comments.